Hi, this is Andrew Sears with City Vision University, and I'm the designer of the COVID-19 for Nonprofits course. And today I have Linda Lysakowski with us, and we're going to be talking about for organizations, the short-term impact is just surviving the next, couple months, but the long-term impact really is going to be impacted by, how well can we fundraise in this environment. And Linda, could you give a little bit of your background around fundraising and just so people understand your experience? And I've asked her to share a little bit about how, what her recommendations are for nonprofit organizations in fundraising in the COVID-19 environment.
Okay. Sure. So I started my fundraising career working at a university, actually my alma mater, and then went to work for a museum. But I've been in consulting for probably 30 some years now, I guess, working a lot of times with smaller nonprofit organizations. I've worked with some homeless shelters and many different kind of social service agencies, domestic violence centers, and groups like that. I've written about I've kind of lost track, about 30 books, mostly for nonprofits, but also I've written one novel and some books in the Christian realm. They've written The Face of Jesus and recently See This Christ, which is my newest book that's out. Also written a travel book, by the way. I have an eclectic background, I guess.
Yeah, that's great.
But I've also been teaching and have taught a number of webinars, courses, symposiums, in person and online. And most recently, I'm really focusing my efforts on writing and on teaching online. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell.
Okay, well, thank you, Linda, and thank you for being willing to share with the nonprofit COVID-19 course community. And so, the question that I asked you was just for nonprofits that are trying to figure out what is their fundraising strategy, what should they do in the COVID-19 environment. What's your recommendations? And if you want to, start sharing your screen now, or you could do that in a minute if you like.
Okay.
Yeah, what's your thoughts in terms of what nonprofits should be doing in this environment in terms of fundraising?
Okay, well, it certainly is an environment that none of us have ever been in before, that's for sure. And I think partly what I'm going to talk about is surviving these next couple months or weeks, whatever it might be. We probably don't know all that yet, but then also to talk about how you can use some of this time to lay the groundwork for the future for some successful fundraising. So on my screen, you can see the title of this is Rethinking Your Fundraising During the COVID-19 Crisis. And like I said, this is certainly a crisis that probably none of us could have predicted. I doubt very much if anybody's ever been through anything like this. So it's going to be definitely a challenge, but I think there are some positive things that are coming out of this, believe it or not. And I think we need to stay focused on some of that positive. So we're definitely living in a different world. And yet there are some ways that I think this world is the same too. Obviously, what's different is people are staying at home. And we were just kind of joking about the fact that the department stores are selling a lot of shirts and tops for women and not very many pants because everybody's living on Zoom now. It seems like that's our new normal. We are staying at home. But people are also, I think, scared. I just found out a friend of mine has the COVID-19.
I don't
She's
know.
hospitalized, but is improving and has very positive outlook on life. And I'm hoping that she comes through this okay. So I think the more it hits home, the more people get a little bit scared. But the other thing that is really scary for the nonprofit community is that our economy is kind of in danger and we don't know where the economy is going to go. But I think there's some things that really haven't changed during this. First of all, and that is the missions that we have still matter. The work that you people are doing is really essential to our community. And so your mission still matters. The other thing that I think is that people are more aware, and we need to keep them aware of our mission, and let them know how important it is. I've been really enheartened, I think, by the generosity of people that have emerged through this. And people seem to be really content to give more. They're more aware of the needs in their community. So I think there's some things that are very different, but I also think there's a lot that hasn't really changed for the nonprofit community. We just have to keep thinking about making that mission important and getting that word out to people and convincing them that yes, we are still needed in the community. So I think how it affects your nonprofit, though, maybe sometimes people haven't really thought through all the ways it affects your nonprofit. Obviously, it's going to affect your staff. And I know that Andrew and his crew are doing a lot of sessions for the staff and what you can do for your staff. So I'm not going to elaborate on that, but I encourage you to listen to those classes on how it can affect your staff. What you might not think about so much as how it affects your board of directors, because the board is really the backbone and kind of the parents of an organization, and they're affected by this too. And obviously your clients are affected. So I think that's certainly something to think about. But it also is affecting your volunteers and your donors. So I want to talk a little bit about each of those categories with the exception of the staff, because I know you're covering that. But I want you to really start thinking about how it affects your whole world, not just your staff. I know that seems to be at the top of almost everybody's priority now. Like, how do we keep our staff paid, and how do we maintain our staff so we can service our clients? Because your clients are among the most vulnerable people and the people that really need services now, maybe more than ever. So I think what you can do for your board, first of all, is provide the technology that they need for board meetings and committee work. And everybody's joking about how overworked Zoom is. I know I've been on a couple of Zoom calls where I've been cut off because there's such a demand. Everybody's living on Zoom. But there are other products out there too. I've used some others. I don't particularly use Google Hangouts, but I know some people love Google Hangouts. GoToMeeting is another thing, but your board members are going to feel disconnected if they can't attend meetings and they feel like they don't know what's going on in your community. So keeping in touch with your board members, even through email. I know one of my clients yesterday, the president of the board, sent out a really great memo to all the board members telling them what's been going on and how the staff is coping. And the good news for them is they were able to get funding to maintain their staff payroll. So that was really encouraging for the board to hear that, because they're actually worried too, because they're fiduciary responsible for your organization. So they want to know what you're doing. And if you can conduct some board meetings through things like Zoom, committee meetings, all of those things are really important to keep in touch, because you don't want to lose your board and have them say, well, we can't focus on this right now. You want to keep them engaged as much as possible. And one of the other things that I would suggest is having a board page on your website so the board members can access documents that they need to do. If you're going to be having a board meeting, have the committee reports put on a website page. There are some programs that allow you to do this, like Boardable, and there's another one, I believe it's called Board Boot Camp. But there's a cost attached to those, and some of your organizations may be on limited budgets. So having just a private page on your website that only can be accessed by your board members will be really valuable to keep them in touch so that they know what's going on during this crisis, because board members really need to be aware of how this is affecting your organization. Some organizations, some of my clients have had to close their doors because they're not essential services, and they really live on admissions pretty much. So they've had to be very creative in some of their other fundraising avenues because they lost that admission revenue that they have. Now, most of your organizations are probably in a case where you're still operating because you are essential to the community. But still, I think the more you can do to make your board members feel at ease and keep them in touch with what's happening, anything that's new that's affecting your organization, good or bad, they need to be aware of it. So by providing that kind of technology, you can keep your board members in in touch with you and in touch with reality. And most of these things are not that expensive to implement. You may have to pay your website designer to set up an extra board page if you don't already have that. And I believe Zoom has donated their services to nonprofits. So you might want to double check that.
Yeah, Linda, let me just throw a couple ideas in here. One is you can get a discount for Zoom through TechSoup, but also a lot of nonprofits are using Google Drive to share documents and Google
Mhm.
Docs to share documents with their board. And that's actually what we do is we
Oh,
have a Google Doc and then that the board uses, and then we link to a bunch of individual files for board meetings. So that's something, you know, if you're in Google provides Google Drive for free for nonprofits also. So that's something that I would recommend that organizations consider.
good, good. Yeah, I haven't used it to, I've used it occasionally, but I'm so accustomed to using Zoom. So, but check around and see what's available. That's really great information, Andrew. I'm glad you shared that. The other thing that I think this is really a great time to think about maybe some new ideas for your board. For example, I've been in this for more than 30 years, and I can tell you that one of the biggest things that most of my clients struggle with is how do I get my board engaged? How do I build a board? I only have 5 people on my board, and I really need to have 15, things like that. So you might want to think about this as taking advantage of this time when maybe you're not as active in doing fundraising events and other things, to maybe think about, is it time to restructure your board? Do you need to have a larger board? Do you need to get more talent on your board? Do you need to get more diversity on your board? And these are things that you can do remotely. You can appoint a governance committee, for example, to study these things. Do we have the right board job description? These are all things that you can be doing remotely and offline. Even beginning the strategic planning process, this might be a good time to have your board think about that. While you won't be able to get them together for strategic planning retreats, which is always the most effective way to do a strategic plan, but you can start doing some of the research. You can look at your last strategic plan if you have one. And if you don't have one, you can go look at samples of other maybe similar organizations, look at their strategic plans that they have on the website, because many nonprofits do post their strategic plan on their website. And you can start doing research into your different stakeholders, maybe send out surveys. I guess there's one advantage of people working at home is that now we can actually reach them at home. So that might be a good time to do that. Get your board more engaged in your fundraising efforts. Maybe think of ways that you can involve them. And we're going to talk about some of those ways in a little while, but get them involved in some fundraising efforts. Maybe they've never been involved in fundraising before, and they've always said, well, I love your organization and I'm happy to serve on the board, but don't ask me to do fundraising. That's a familiar thing for many people. I think I've heard that from a lot of board members, unfortunately. And even teaching them more about your organization. I've often found that sometimes board members don't really understand the programs that you do. I've sat in a lot of board meetings where board members seem to be not totally unaware, but they aren't really in depth knowledgeable about the programs that you do. So maybe you can do some online training for your board members on your programs. Have some of your program officers come in and talk to them about what your programs do and how they make an impact, because any board member that you expect to be involved in fundraising needs to really have that passion deep in their heart for what your organization's mission is. So if you can have, I always like to suggest that a live board meeting to have a mission moment where maybe one of your program officers gets up and talks about how they've worked with an individual or a family and what a difference they've made in their lives. Of course, they're keeping the individuals anonymous, but just the stories that they tell. This would be a great time to involve your board in hearing those stories. I don't know, Andrew, if you've had any organizations that have tried this that maybe you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, well, I think it all depends on the type of organizations and how COVID-19 is affecting them. For some, they're completely overwhelmed during this season, and for others, and it's the same thing I've heard with friends. Some people, they're completely overwhelmed. Some people have a lot more free time, and investing in your board, if you can't do a fundraising event, say you're going to spend a month on a fundraising event, well, you can invest in your board. So basically what you're saying is focus on the fundamentals.
Right.
And I think that's a great idea. What's interesting is we're actually already doing the things that you're recommending for our next board meeting, because they're
Great.
already kind of planned. We have a governance committee meeting this week, but I'm also trying to figure out how do we retool it for COVID-19. And I think part of what we're going to do is we're going to do a strategic planning meeting that COVID-19 is really the focus. So we're going to do SWOT analysis, but it's going to be a SWOT with the focus is particularly on the environment of the opportunities and threats related to COVID-19. And how do our strengths and weaknesses, how do those relate to COVID-19 also?
That's great.
Because, and I think that's a good idea, to focus on the fundamentals. Now, for some, if you're a homeless shelter where you're just barely surviving, it may not be the best time to do long-term strategic planning. It may be crisis management, right? And
Right.
the board informed. So I think some of it will depend on what context your organization is operating in, and is this a time where you actually have some resources freed up? I talked to one, executive director, and he said, I'm so much more productive because I'm at home, because people aren't interrupting me every 2 minutes.
Right.
And
I've been working at home for the last probably 15 years of my maybe more than that. About 18 years of my consulting practice. The first 12 or 15 years, I did have an office where I had several people working with me every day. And I honestly found out when I moved to Nevada is when I decided that most of my staff was still in Pennsylvania and I still needed them. But we decided to get rid of the office space. I distributed all the computer equipment and everything else to everyone and left them work at home. And I found I was twice as productive just being at home, because you don't have those interruptions that you have when you're in an office. So I think that's a real advantage that we need to take advantage of. And when you mentioned, doing the SWOT analysis, there are some opportunities out there that actually, have come about because of this. So it's like I said,
yeah,
I'm the eternal optimist. I always look on the bright side and
right.
think, how can we take advantage of the opportunities that are out there? So
Yeah, well, I'm an extreme both optimist and pessimist in this. What I'm telling nonprofits to prepare is that this is likely to be the biggest disruption to the nonprofit community since World War II.
yeah, at
But
least.
I believe 2 or 3 years, into this, we're going to have the biggest recovery in the economy since World War
Mhm.
II. So what you got to do is you just got to survive this season. It's like
Right.
if you had a tsunami come, you got to survive the wave. Except in this case, it's going to be a 2-year wave, right?
Yeah,
So
sadly, it
um,
may be.
yeah. So what are so yeah? I'm eager to see some of the other slides that you have on. What are your recommendations, particularly around fundraising? So, lay the foundation with your board, for organizations that have the time to do that. So what's some of your other recommendations, if you want to jump into those slides?
Okay. Well, one thing that is, and this is really not related directly to fundraising, but in a way it is, obviously with your clients, you have to make sure that they have essential services. And if you can provide some of them virtually, that's a story that you can tell. Do your fundraising that, yes, you're still providing services for people and you still need funding. And I think, as an example, my church has done this. I have a small parish of about maybe 300 families or something. And we've set up a phone tree just to call people, and particularly older people who are living alone, to make sure they're okay and just stay in touch with them. And it's been really encouraging. And we do all our services online, of course, through YouTube. But also, we remind people that we still need their donations. And I personally am one who does a monthly donation virtually anyway. I've been doing online donating for a long time. But this might be a good way to reach out to people and say, hey, we're still taking care of our clients and we still have needs. So I think that's something that's important. The other thing is, I think this might be an opportunity for you to collaborate with some other nonprofits in your community, because maybe you can't provide some of your services virtually, but maybe there are some other nonprofits in the community that might be able to provide some of those services that you can make referrals to. And I think whenever nonprofits collaborate, it's always good. It's very positive to the foundation community. They love to see collaboration. Many foundations don't want to fund a particular organization. They want to fund a program. And if there's 3 or 4 organizations in their community that are collaborating to deliver that program, they'll all be funded. So I think collaboration is a really good idea. Then you should think about that. Is there some way that you can do collaboration, which in the long run is going to benefit your fundraising?
And Linda, so that gets into a section of the nonprofit COVID course that we have is resources to help individuals and families. And we have a whole section that covers, things like how do you connect with other, agencies? How do you help people who might need, computers or internet access? Or we also have, all these stimulus checks are being sent home, which is really critical right now because people aren't working and some people are laid off. But what a lot of people don't realize is if you haven't filed taxes in the past 2 years, then you're not going to get a stimulus check. So we provide information on how people can actually register so they get their stimulus check. And for low-income communities, that's actually a high percentage of people.
Yes,
So
sure.
so that's some of the resources we're doing. We're going to continue to update that. So, but yeah,
So
I'll let you go.
stay tuned to all Andrew's
Yeah,
sessions on these things because they are important.
yeah,
Also, I think volunteers, if you've been working with volunteers at all, maybe you've worked with volunteers, but not in the fundraising realm. And maybe some of you have, but this is a great way to engage volunteers, especially those who aren't maybe working right now, or they're working from home and they still find that they have some time to do volunteer work. And I'm incredibly amazed at how many people are out there doing volunteer work. So if you haven't engaged volunteers in fundraising, here might be some ideas. You could get them involved, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on each of these, but you can get them involved in social media fundraising appeals. You can have them help you do some research, both with foundations, businesses, and individuals. You might consider doing a virtual event rather if you've been dependent on special events, and those are usually pretty volunteer driven. But also there are some virtual appeals. So I want to talk about some of those things when we get into some fundraising basics. But I think before I do that, I want to talk about your donors, because right now you need your donors more than ever. So I think it's important to let your donors know that you care. Check in with them by email or by phone and just say, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Many of your donors are probably older people and maybe the more at-risk people in your community. So just keeping in touch with your donors and letting them know that you care about how they are and you want to make sure they're okay. But also let them know what you're doing. Tell them what you're doing to continue to serve your clients during this crisis, and let them know that you still need their support. As I mentioned, my church, I think, has done an excellent job with this because they're reaching out to all our members, who are obviously all donors too, letting us know that they still care about us, and letting us know what they're doing, but also letting us know that they still need our support because, the bills still keep coming in, whether you're holding services in your church or whether you're doing them virtually, you still have bills to pay and salaries and things like that. So I think staying in touch with your donors as much as possible is a real key critical issue. And you can do that by phone, you can do it by email. You obviously can't get out probably and visit donors in person if that's something you normally do, but think about ways that you can stay in touch with your donors. So some ways that you might want to keep in mind with your donor communications is, first of all, anytime you communicate with your donors, whether it's in a crisis or after this crisis, these things are valuable. You should always let your donors know that you're grateful for their past support. The first sentence in any fundraising appeal letter should always be, if it's an existing donor, it should be, "Thank you for your past support of our organization." And then let them know how their money was used. There have been studies on this, like what the donors expect from the organizations that they support. And overwhelmingly, the one thing that most donors want is they want to know how their money was actually used. Now, that doesn't mean you have to say to them, "Well, we bought 2,000 paper clips and 45 staples," or whatever, but let them know that their money made a difference. People want to know that they're doing something to change lives. So if you can say your gift of $100 or $50 or $5,000, whatever it was, this is how we use that money. We were able to provide this program. We were able to, maybe we had to buy some technology to continue operating our services, things like that. So, and if you can do things like broadcasting your current programs on virtual and, give them actually that virtual hands-on experience. I know I've been involved with people who have done things like this even before, way before this virus struck. One of my clients was actually a place that served people with developmental disabilities, and they ran residential programs and they ran some social programs. Well, they couldn't bring people in and tour their facility because there was nothing going on in their facility. It was all done out in the community. But they went to all their, they used to call them group homes, and back in those days, now that's probably not the politically correct language, but they went out and took photos of their group homes with the permission of the residents. They took photos of the different social events and activities, and they did a PowerPoint presentation and showed people. Really, it was not quite as good as being there in person, but you can't always invade people's privacy. But you can take people on a virtual tour through Facebook Live or through Zoom or through YouTube and give people some experience with what you're actually doing, because that's what makes donors really want to give, when they see and can put a face to the people that they're helping. So I think that's more important than giving statistics. People don't usually care, the numbers of homeless people or the numbers of people that are addicted. They care about what are you doing to change their lives. And when you can give people that hands-on experience and let them see what you're doing to change lives, that's going to keep your donors more engaged. And you also need a strong case for support that explains your community needs, not your needs. People don't give because, oh gosh, we don't have money coming in because of this crisis and the businesses in our community have been hurt and they aren't supporting us. They don't want to hear about your needs. They want to hear about the community needs and how you're addressing those needs. So make sure, this would be a great time if you don't have a written case for support, to take the time to write that case for support. Again, you have some free time, hopefully, on your hands. Some of you, I know some of you are probably in demand to do a lot of other things, but if you have the time, use that time to write a strong, compelling case for support that you can present to people based on the community needs, not just on your needs, because people don't want to hear about your needs. They want to hear how you're filling needs in the community. So those are some hints on communicating with your donors. Now, how to run some social media appeals. And these are some things that maybe you can get your board and your volunteers and your staff to do. I think all of us have probably seen on Facebook. I know every day I seem to get some birthday appeal for some friend of mine that's involved in a nonprofit organizations, and they say, gosh, instead of birthday gifts this year, and I'm not having a birthday party, um, instead of me having a birthday party, here's a way that you can celebrate. You can make a donation to my favorite charity, and get your board members and your staff members and your volunteers to do things like that, because first of all, it helps you raise money, but secondly, it also gets your name out in the community too. So that's a good idea. The other thing you should do is make sure you have a good up-to-date website. And again, this is something that can be done if you have a website designer. They typically work remotely anyway. They don't come into your office to do this stuff, but make sure that you have that give now button, donate now button, whatever you call it, on every page of your website. So no matter what people are looking for, they're looking to see who's on your board. They're going to get that notice, donate now. They're looking to see your strategic plan, donate now button that pops up. So that's something that you can do remotely. And use that social media to raise awareness of your organization, even if you're not using it for fundraising, using Twitter and Facebook and Pinterest and all the different, there's so many social media avenues out there these days, it's hard to keep track of them all. But I think most people can really take advantage of raising awareness in their community if they take advantage of using those social media appeals. And again, that's something that you can get your board members, your staff members, your volunteers, and maybe even your donors to say, gosh, I support this organization. Here's why I support it. And here's how you can learn more about what they're doing. So those are some things that you can do for social media.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, especially the birthday. You know, there's so many birthday parties that are being canceled. And
Right.
if no one's going to come to your birthday party, you might as well raise some money remotely through,
Right.
a virtual appeal, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think just letting people know about the things you're doing, like I can think of an example. We have I live in a kind of a retirement. My whole town is a lot of older people, and we have 5 retirement community or nursing homes. Really, they're not retirement communities; they're skilled nursing facilities. And one of them did the neatest thing. They said, because their residents can have visitors now, they decided to take all the residents that were able to. They took them out on the parking lot and had invited people to just drive through the parking lot and smile and wave. That's all. They weren't allowed to stop or anything because they're not allowed to have visitors. But it was amazing. We must have had, I think there must have been 500 cars just driving through there, including a classic car club that did this. But it was so encouraging to see people doing things like that. And if you're doing anything like that, get it out on your website so people know what you're doing and what the need is. So I think there's a lot of really great social media
Yeah.
things you can
Yeah,
do.
that's a great idea.
The other thing that you can do while you're at home, and maybe some of your volunteers are at home, is spend this time doing some research. Maybe you have some volunteers who are real computer geeks and they love doing this. This is not my favorite thing to do. Believe me, I do not enjoy research, but I know it has to be done. But if you have access to the foundation directory, or you can go to GuideStar and look up foundations on there and have some of your volunteers search foundations. Who's in your community or who funds organizations in your community? What kind of projects do they give to? What is their normal range of the grants that they make? So you can spend this time doing a lot of foundation research using either the foundation directory or GuideStar, or just if you really don't have access to the foundation directory, go to GuideStar and look for 990 forms from foundations, not from charitable organizations. But foundations also file a special 990 form. or just look at websites if you know there are foundations in your community or in your state, or maybe even some national foundations that would fund nationally. So that's something that your volunteers can do if you don't have the staff time to devote to research. Researching businesses, this is also fairly easy because most businesses of any size today have a website. And a lot of the bigger businesses, especially, have a section on their website that talks about social responsibility. And some of them have pet things that they might fund. I know I worked for a bank before I was in development. I was in the banking industry. And when I worked for the bank, at the time I was working for them, they were really big on environmental causes. And so when I started my consulting business, I had an environmental client, and I said, well, you should go to the bank because that's one of their big things. Well, by that time they had changed their emphasis. And some people do this, some businesses and some foundations. They, at that time, decided that they were going to focus on three areas: health, homelessness, and hunger. And so anybody that was involved in hunger or homelessness, that was a good opportunity for them. So you can research businesses by just looking at their website, doing some searches online, or maybe even doing some brainstorming. This is a good time to get your board members and your volunteers on an online meeting, maybe on Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever vehicle you have, and do some brainstorming about what businesses do they know. A lot of times people think, oh, our board members aren't business people. They don't know anybody in the business world. And when you actually sit down and do this brainstorming, I guarantee you're going to uncover some connections that you had no idea existed. I remember once working with a small community library, and their board were basically blue collar workers. And I thought, well, they probably don't have a lot of contacts with really wealthy people. And it turned out we were doing a brainstorming session. This was in person, but it turned out that the chair of their board, who I would have never imagined in a million years would have connections with some high-powered people, because she was a factory worker. She came to board meetings wearing jeans and a sweatshirt that she wore to work in the factory. And when we started brainstorming, it turned out we had a very extremely wealthy and extremely philanthropic couple in that community. And I thought, well, nobody in this board is going to have a contact with them. Turned out the board chair said, oh, yeah, I can talk to him. He's my cousin. So you just never know what contacts your board members and your volunteers have. And even your staff members may have some contacts. So maybe do some online brainstorming about businesses in your community that might help fund your organization. And then individuals, now this research is a little bit harder. You can get some electronic screening forms like Windfall or Donor Search. Those are two that are pretty good at doing individual research. So if you have the money to invest, you might want to invest in one of these companies now and do that research now, so you're prepared after COVID-19 to get out and make some contacts with these people. But again, you can do this through brainstorming, and you might be surprised at some of the philanthropists and wealthy people that your board, your staff, and your volunteers have contact with. So that's something that you can be doing during this time.
Yeah, that's great. I think you're really covering, you know, the messages I hear you saying is, you know, for your existing donors, make sure you touch base with them and stabilize them, but also, you know, use this time whenever you can't do events or other types of things to, you know, lay a lot of the foundation and things along those lines. So, yeah.
Right. And talking about events, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because unfortunately, I think a lot of nonprofits are really addicted to events. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's the only other way to describe it. They have sometimes, I had one client who had 14 special events a year with a one-person development office. And I used to kind of joke with this guy because he was a former Marine. And I said, who else would have the stamina to do 14 special events a year? But a lot of organizations are way too focused on special events. So this is a good time for you to get rid of that addiction and really evaluate the special events that you're holding. I know many of my clients hold special events year after year, and they're not that productive because they just aren't making that much money. And especially when they look at not only the hard costs of the event, but the soft costs of the event, how much staff time, how much volunteer time goes into running those events. So this would be a good time. And if anybody wants this, I have a special event evaluation tool that I'd be happy to share with you that helps you evaluate special events and decide if they're really worthwhile doing. So right now, once you've done that evaluation, maybe you say, gosh, we really are doing 6 events a year and only one of them is making money, and the others we just keep doing because we've been doing it for 30 years and we don't want to stop. So maybe take a look at, is there one virtual event you could do? Maybe you can you obviously can't get people out there running and walking, although you could challenge people to go out and walk on their own in a private setting, and maybe suggest that they do something like that, because we all need more exercise right now, I think. So that's something that you might be able to do as a virtual event. I also have some resources for you that in a handout that have some ideas for places to do virtual events. And the Chronicle of Philanthropy just ran a webinar on how to turn an event into a virtual event. But also, I want you to think beyond this COVID-19, because eventually we are going to come out of this. Hopefully, we'd all like to see it happen next month. If it doesn't happen next month, it might happen in a couple months or later. But choose one of those mission-related events that you really want to continue after all this is over. And what I mean by a mission-related event is, so many organizations do events like runs, walks, golf tournaments, tennis tournaments, bowl-a-thons. And most of the people that come to those events are there because they like to run, walk, bowl, play tennis, or whatever it is that you're doing. They're not there because they really are that involved with your organization. So try to pick one event that really ties people into your mission. And if you can do that, that's going to be the one event that you should focus on after all this is over. So look at some virtual events now, but look at one live event that you think you want to keep, maybe 2 at the most. I think most organizations can't really handle more than 1 or 2 events a year. But make it one that really does relate to your mission, and it somehow gets people involved in your mission and gets them really to hear your story.
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to suggest on the virtual events, you know, a lot of people don't realize the advantages of technology. So for us being a national organization, it can be really difficult to connect students that, you know, we might have a student that is one of our best stories of just a changed life of the year, and they're
Right.
in a completely different part of the country between, you know, 2 different donors, and they're in different cities.
Mm-hmm.
But we could now have a Zoom call where we could have the student share a story, or we could have, you know, an organizational leader share a story, and get them on a Zoom call with donors. So I think that you know, there's ways that technology can be used, and you know what I've been telling people is that you know, everything kind of has an online counterpart. So, you know,
Right.
churches are going online, and then small groups are going online, conferences are going online,
Mhm.
and, you know, you have these events and you have tables. You know, each Zoom meeting, I think, is kind of like a table.
Right.
And, you know, you can even have a larger Zoom meeting, so you could get 100 people on a Zoom call, and then Zoom
Mhm.
has the ability to do breakout rooms, and you could have, you know, 100 donors on a call. And you know, one of the appeals right now, I think, for Zoom is just talking to other people, and
Right.
especially, you know, people who feel isolated. And,
Mhm.
you know, one of the things that people often do with tables is they try to get people who have common interests together. Well, start to do Zoom calls, you know, with people with common interest, and they will engage, you know, as much to be with their peers as they are with your organization. But it's that social contact that I think people are looking for.
Right.
And I think
I
that
think
if you
it's,
connect that with your mission, that's going to be the new walkathon.
I
You
think
know, it's going to
so.
be connecting that way. So yeah, sorry, but go ahead with
And
your
I
virtual
think
appeals
you
slides
said
there.
something that was really key, that might be the next walkathon. You know, once we do get back to normal, we don't have to change. If these things are working for us now, keep them going afterwards too. So you don't have to go back to all the logistics of walkathons and golf tournaments and all that. You can do some of those things online and accomplish that. So that's a great idea. Some other things that you might think about for fundraising is direct mail is still an option and it does still work. I know a lot of people don't like direct mail. I personally am not a person who responds very well to direct mail, but I have to say I'm kind of disappointed now when I go, for some of us now going to the mailbox is a highlight of our day. And if you go to the mailbox and don't get anything, you're like, oh my gosh, nobody's mailing anything. But people are still getting direct mail and it does work. It's been proven. It's not the most cost effective way to raise money, especially if you're doing acquisition mailing where you're buying a list or renting a list. And it's not usually the most productive, but since people can't get out in person, I think more people are going to be responsive to direct mail than they ever were before. And some people are always responsive to direct mail. I have a friend who um, is pretty well off, and he is big on direct mail. And he gets, sometimes he says 60 or 70 pieces of direct mail a month, maybe more. He saves them, and every quarter he goes through them all and sorts them into three piles: the people he's definitely going to give to, the people he's definitely not, and those go in the trash, and then the people that he might give to. And he probably gives about $100,000 every quarter when he does this. So lots of people are still responsive to direct mail. So if you have a mailing list of your own, you don't have to pay for uh, acquisition mailing, and you're going to get better results with people who are already your donors. So look into your existing donor list, and this might be a good time to update it. Make sure it's up to date. Share it with some of your staff and your board and volunteers and say, does this list still look right? Or do you know anybody here who has moved, gotten married, gotten divorced, whatever, changed their name for one reason or another? But direct mail still works. And then, of course, email is really much more cost effective because you don't have to print and you don't have to spend postage, but you may not have emails for everyone. So maybe this is a good time to go through your database and say, okay, who do we have emails for? And if you don't have emails, maybe you can get those people's email so that your next appeal will save you money. Now, some people respond better. I respond much better to direct mail or phone appeals than I do to, or email appeals than I will to direct mail. But some people still like the direct mail. They want the feel and touch of the letter in their hand and the pictures maybe that you're going to send them. Um, but knowing your donors is a way to know how to approach them. And then this, to me, is a perfect time to do a volunteer phone-a-thon. And I know a lot of people resist telephone fundraising because they think, oh, I don't want those telemarketers calling me. But this is different. These are not telemarketers. This is volunteers, and you're calling people that know your organization, that give to your organization, that support your organization in one way or another. And I think this is really a perfect time to do a phone-a-thon, first of all, because people are home for the most part. I mean, most of us might run out to the doctor or the grocery store once a week or so, but most of us are in our homes and we're stuck here. So using volunteers, get a bunch of volunteers who are willing to make calls from their home. But first of all, check your list and check it twice, like Santa Claus always says. I'm having a list and I'm checking it twice because you want to make sure that everybody that's on this list agrees that you can call them, that you have their phone numbers, that they're up to date. And then have your case for support and your talking points built around that. what is it that you're raising money for? Is it for a particular program or project that you might be engaged in? And you can train your volunteers virtually. I would suggest if you recruit 10 or 20 volunteers to make phone calls, get them on a Zoom meeting or some other format and train them into what to say when they make the calls, and give them a phone-a-thon form ahead of time so they know what to fill out on the form to take the pledges from people. But you can do all this virtually, and most people might welcome the fact that they're getting a phone call from someone, because today we're so out of touch physically, but we can still stay in touch spiritually and mentally with each other. And I think the phone is a perfect way to do this. So I would really suggest looking into doing some kind of a phone appeal, because I think it would be a great way to get your volunteers involved, but also to have that personal touch with your donors. And phone appeals are still more successful than direct mail because it is more personal.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because that's something that's easily done remotely also. So
Yeah. So what do we do post COVID-19? Well, I think the way we operate in the future is going to change too. We have our human resources, our staffing patterns might be different. I know my son works for the federal government, and he was doing remote work. He was only going into the office once a day, and then he got a new boss, and his new boss didn't like working at home. He didn't think it was a efficient way to do it, but now they're forced to do it. And so, if nothing, I think it might change his boss's attitude going forward, that, gee, maybe we can have staff work at home. And with the greater technology that we have, we can still do this. I think it's going to change the way we work with our volunteers. It's, for some of us, maybe going to change our client services. Maybe we'll be more creative in the ways that we think about to deliver some of these. It certainly is going to affect our fundraising and our communications, and I think our governance. So what I think it's going to do is we're going to all see that we have a greater reliance on technology, but we're also going to see a greater need to diversify our funding streams. If you were dependent on special events, heavily dependent on it, this is definitely should change your attitude about what other ways can we raise money: through direct mail, through email, through social media, through major gifts, through phone-a-thons, just through business appeals, things like that. And actually, I think it might give us more opportunities for volunteers, because I've been really amazed at the way people are stepping up to volunteer. And even your staff, now that maybe they're working at home, they may be able to take aside some time while they're at home to do more volunteering. And I would encourage that among your staff, because being a volunteer makes you much more understanding of how volunteers feel when they're working with your organization. We need to definitely emphasize communications, very strong communications with our donors. And we're probably going to need to have more sensitivity to our client needs in the future too. But I would really, look at ways that you can be more flexible in the future. And if any good comes out of this horrendous thing that we're going through, it could be that your organization is going to come through this stronger than ever. So I would hope that you would do that. So I would encourage you to use this downtime productively. First of all, use this time to train your staff, your board, and your volunteers as much as possible. And even getting your staff encouraged in doing something for the community. Like I know a bunch of women in my community are making masks. I don't sew, so I couldn't volunteer for that. But I did volunteer to call shut-ins, and I do some volunteer ministry in my community in the nursing homes. And I'm doing that virtually. Instead of going there and conducting a service, I did it on Zoom and sent them the link so they can still share it and the people get to see someone. So encourage your volunteers and your staff to do more volunteering. And of course, making sure that your staff are taking care of themselves is important. I know you've already talked about this, but encourage them to eat properly and get out and do as much as they can. So I think I'd like to close with an online opportunity that I mentioned to Andrew. I do have an online course subscription for $499. It's 14 different courses, and they're worth a total of 78 CFRE credits for any of you who might be CFREs or are thinking about going for your CFRE. But I also have a free online session called Learn with Linda. So every month I'm covering a different topic, and you can sign up for those at lysakowskicourses.com. So I encourage you to sign up for the free courses and other courses that you might see. Some are free, some might have a cost attached to them, but do as much online learning as you can, because this is perfect while you're at home to take the time to do that for those of you who are working from home. So Andrew, I don't know if you have any final thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice. I have a friend who he actually works for, he works at the Apple store, and you can imagine he's not able to do work right now.
Right.
But Apple is taking really good care of them and continuing to pay. But I asked him, what is he doing? And Apple made all their training available to people from home. Normally, it's only available to them in the store.
Oh,
And you got to imagine Apple has some of the best training resources in the world. So he's
oh
spending his
yeah.
time taking courses. So there's going to be some staff that are going to, in some organizations, they'll just be overwhelmed, and then other staff and organizations that will have the extra time. And I think that this is the perfect time to take courses, and especially around fundraising. Linda's 14 courses how many CFRE credits did you say it was
A
worth?
total of 78 CFRE credits if you
Yeah,
take them
so that
all.
that can be really valuable to you and your organization. So I'd encourage you to check that out. So
And you don't have to
hopefully,
take them all in the next 2 weeks. It's a lifetime subscription, so you have a whole lifetime to take them.
yeah, and hopefully you find this helpful. I believe that in the short term, there's going to be a lot of resources that organizations are going to need to use, and that's what we put in our nonprofit COVID-19 course. But I think the most important in the long-term survival for most nonprofit organizations is going to be fundraising,
Mhm.
and having your fundraising game. Don't let yourself get discouraged. Keep your game going. I believe that the world that nonprofits need to be prepared for is going to be a really rough one for the next 2 years. Probably the worst, most challenging environment for nonprofits since World War II. But I believe after that, it's going to be the best growth environment for nonprofits since World War II. So you just have to make it through this time. Continue to tell your stories. If um, your organization needs help, stay connected with your donors, and I believe if you do that, then that'll make a big difference. So Linda, thank you for taking out the time to share with those who are taking this course. And I would encourage you to connect with Linda and take a look at her resources. So thanks a lot.